What's going on, Icon fam? Big Jer, back with you guys again. And today, we're going to be back in part 2 of our layering extended chords videos. Okay? Today, I'm going to be talking about building from a blueprint. Okay? We already built our blueprint in the last video. That was our MIDI clip with our extended chords. Now I'm going to talk about taking that MIDI clip, our blueprint, and we're going to go ahead and build that out. You could build out these blueprints in multiple ways. Today, we're going to build it out making a cinematic cue. So I'm going to show you guys how to select the proper sound source, right? By using your MIDI clips. So we're going to assign different sound sources to different notes. And we're going to talk about properly stacking these guys. All right? Let's get into it. All right, so the first thing I want to do is remind you what our chords and extensions both looked and sounded like, and then we'll compare it to our orchestral stack. Okay, here we go. Beautiful. Now I'll go over here, solo our orchestral stack, and let's hear how that sounds. Awesome. Obviously, our orchestral stack sounds a lot fuller and more built out, but as far as the notes go, they're the exact same. So let's talk about how I decided on what instruments to assign to what notes. So building from a blueprint. What do I even mean by this? Well, we could build out a couple of different blueprints, right? If we were building out like a motif for a melody, that would be cool. But in this particular blueprint, we were building out chord extensions. So in the middle, we have our thick chord, okay? This is going to be the main part of our harmony, okay? Above it, you'll see our extensions. Okay, I put them an octave above just for separation. And then an octave below our main harmony, I have our bass notes. Now the reason I separated these like this is so you can clearly see them and we could start assigning them to appropriate instruments. Now what does that mean by appropriate instruments? Well, would I assign a flute down to my bass notes? Obviously not. And would it be a smart idea to put a sub, with my extensions? Probably not. But before we get into actually assigning instruments to these different notes, I want to be specific and say when designing from a blueprint, let's stick to the blueprint. We're going to do this in a sequential order and not open up a can of worms by never actually settling on something and allowing yourself to keep making changes. So when designing a blueprint, we're going to spend time and make our chords, make our bass line, and make our extensions in this case, and we're going to stick to that. In this way, we can move past our design and into actual sample selection. So let's get into talking about how we can assign instruments to these notes now. So what could we assign to this middle section? Well, beginners would probably go ahead and put a string ensemble here. Now, that's kind of what I did in this particular project to make things a little bit easier for you guys. However, a real orchestral build-out might assign different layers. Like we might assign the bottom voice to maybe a cello. We might assign the middle voice to like a viola, and then maybe the top voice to a violin. And that would be our own specific string ensemble. So let's talk about this bottom layer. What are some appropriate instruments for that? Well, sure, we've got our sub, right? But we also have instruments like a double bass. We also have a trombone or a tuba. These kind of lower register instruments would be very appropriate for the bottom register. And then up top on our extensions, well, we could use a flute. We could use a soloist like a vocalist. We could use a thinner type of violin, like a nice soloist, like a chair one violin could do it up there. So when we're going to take our blueprint and start assigning instruments, especially in this orchestral design, we want to be specific that the instruments we choose can properly represent the notes and the register that we've written. So now let's talk about stacking these sounds. We've done a lot of talking about what to think about and how to approach it, And now that we've made some decisions, let's get in there and actually start stacking some sounds. I do want to mention that all the sounds are coming directly from Ableton. Kontakt does offer a lot of orchestral options as well, but I wanted to keep this pretty simple and make the tools that I used available for everyone. So if you have Ableton, you most likely have the ability to get these as well. So these are the ones that I'm using right over here. So let's talk about stacking up the low end real quick. So I've got myself a sub. Okay, and a sub goes from basically from 30 hertz up to around 100 hertz, essentially. And that's what we've got here. So I've got my bottom tied off at around 30 hertz, and I've got my top tied off at around 100 hertz. And if we listen to that, you can see that I've trapped my sub right in there. There it is, living right in between there. Now we also have a double bass. Now let's check this out as well, okay? Now that's definitely going to be down in the lower register. And if you look here, what I've done is I've kind of tied it off right at 100. Okay, so right around where the sub would stop. So we could bring it right down to meet the sub if you want. Okay, so now I've got the sub being from 30 hertz to 100 hertz, and I've got my double bass here picking up right where my sub left off. Okay, and this is going to give us a very nice stack. Let me solo both of these and let's listen to them. Amazing. So from there, we want to start putting these together like Legos or puzzle pieces. Everybody gets to be the star, right? So if you remember correctly, our sub, he's the star down here. And our double bass, well, he gets to be the star in this area right here. And our low instruments are usually going to be mono. So now we have some room to add our string ensemble. And that's exactly what I did here. I've got a string ensemble, okay? And what I've done is I've used mid-side EQ to really get these guys out of the way of the top end of my double bass. You see what I'm trying to say here, guys? Stacking is both spatial and frequencies. So you want to make sure you're stacking your frequencies, but when you have overlapping stuff like you do in this area, well, we need to get it out of the way spatially. Okay? So these are the things I want you to think about while you're stacking your sounds. All right, guys, let's recap real quick. Remember, whether you're building out a song or designing a melody or designing some chords, I recommend starting from a blueprint. Spend your time on that blueprint and get it just right. Then switch gears and start assigning appropriate sounds, whether it's violins or super saws, arpeggiators or trombones. Remember, every instrument, whether synthetic or organic, has a frequency that it best represents, a frequency area where it's really strong. And applying that instrument to the right frequency area is very important. Also, a thing to keep in mind when stacking sounds is both spatial design and stacking them appropriately with frequencies. So when your frequencies are stacked correctly, make sure you get everything out of the way, assigning some things to be more mono and some things to be more wide. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this lesson and stick here for some more cool tips. All right, see you soon.